وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So inshallah, this is the third lecture of our Tawhid Essential series. So we're just moving in order, as it were. The first lecture was talking about the Salafi Wahhabi movement, who is Sheikh Muhammad Abdul Wahhab, and the Salafi movement and what they say about Tawhid. And the second lecture we talked about one of the main issues of disagreement, which is asking the Prophet ﷺ dua for you when you visit Medina Sharif or from a distance. And today I'm just going to talk about something called tawassul, and then the issue of going to the grave of a pious person and making dua there. And inshallah Monday we'll move off slightly, branch off for this, and then talk about going to the grave of a deceased person, asking them to make dua. What do scholars say about that? So initially I was going to cover that today, but then I switched it around for a couple of reasons. Okay, so in terms of the actual topic and what we're going to cover in this particular lecture itself, number one, the issue of making dua by asking by the rank or status of a pious person. Let me give examples of that in a moment. And the second thing is deliberately going out to a grave of a pious person and making dua there because it is a blessed place. So both of these issues, a number of the Salafi school differs with the Sunni scholars in saying both of these are haram and an innovation. They don't say it's shirk, by the way. They say it's haram. So we'll just look at the evidences for it as well. Okay, so to start off with, hadith of the cave. You may have come across this hadith, but this closely ties in with this topic. And this hadith talks about where people take refuge in a cave, where a large rock rolls and blocks the entrance. They supplicate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with their good actions. So this is a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told the companions about this incident in the past. So they're blocked in the cave, so they make dua and they ask Allah to help them, and each of them presents one good action that they did. So it's mentioned in the hadith, and I'm summarizing here. One person says they served their parents very well, and they ask Allah, because of my service to my parents, that good action, help me in this situation or help us in this situation. And the hadith mentions the rock moves a little bit, but not enough for them to get out. And then the second person says that the good action that he did was he did not take advantage of a vulnerable woman. So a lady was vulnerable and she was in need, and then he was going to take advantage of her, and then she told him to fear Allah, and then he stopped, even though there was nothing stopping him but the fear of Allah. And this was a good action that he presents. And then the hadith mentions that the rock moves. And then the third person mentions honesty regarding a laborer's wages. So they had somebody's wages, they did some work for them, and then invested it, and the money that they invested for the person multiplied significantly. So that's a major hadith in regards to this topic. So what the hadith means is when you make dua, it's a good thing to mention a good action that you've done. Oh Allah, by the fact that I served my parents, or by the fact that I did not take advantage of people, forgive my sins, or another need that you have. You move on to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's a general principle. How does that tie in? So you're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're making a dua and you're giving a good action, something good, and you're mentioning something good you've done, and in result that may God willing, result in your dua. And this is hadith in Bukhari Muslim. So we present something good, a good action. Right. So what do the schools of Sunni fiqh say? So they say the following. The codified position of the four Sunni schools of fiqh is that it's permitted to supplicate to Allah Ta'ala by invoking the rank and status of a pious person. So a pious person, what are they? What do they have that makes them pious? If you look at the previous hadith, it was talking about good actions. So a pious person, you're talking about in effect their good actions as well. So some scholars, Sunni scholars argue from that hadith, we take the principle that you can ask Allah by a pious person, and at their head, at the top, at their peak is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is known as tawassul, according to some scholars. So it's, oh Allah, I ask you by the rank of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's in English you would say. Some people might say by the wasila of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But this is different to going to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's grave, blessed grave, and asking dua there. And then last week we also talked about from a distance as well, calling on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the scholars who permit it as well, because it is conveyed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and discuss the evidences for that as well. So that's one form. And then the other form is, oh Allah, I ask you by the companions who participated in Badr. And this often happens in Ramadan. You have gatherings where they recite the names of the companions, and a dua might be made by the rank of the companions, or by the companions who participated in Badr, because they were pious people. And the evidence for that is not just from that hadith, because you might be thinking that hadith of the cave, okay, I understand good actions, but it doesn't fully connect with the wording here. So where did the Sunni scholars come up with this ruling that is permitted and it's a good thing to do? And obviously, as I mentioned before, the Salafi school, they say it's an innovation, it's haram. So by the right of the Prophet, there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where, as part of the hadith, it says, the Prophet ﷺ said, forgive my mother Fatima, the daughter of Asad. So Fatima, the daughter of Asad, is the mother of Imam Ali radiallahu anh. So as you know, the Prophet ﷺ, his parents passed away at an early age, and he was then taken under the care eventually of Abu Talib. And this is the wife of Abu Talib, Fatima, the daughter of Asad. And grant her ease at her entryway by the right of your Prophet. So that wording is used by the Prophet ﷺ. By the right of your Prophet and the Prophets before me, for you are the most compassionate. So this is mentioned in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that this wording was used by him. And this hadith is mentioned in Tabarani, narrated in Al-Kabir and Al-Awsat, and his chain contains Raw bin Salah, whom Ibn Hibban and Al-Hakim declared trustworthy, although there is some weakness in him, and the rest of its sub-narrators are the men of the sound hadith. So it's a valid, it's a sound narration. The reason I mentioned it is because the Salafi school often say the Sunni schools of law or Sunni scholars cite weak hadith. So you have to mention those scholars who said it's an authentic hadith. Because often you may mention this and say, well, it's a weak hadith. So that's why I'm being quite particular in mentioning those scholars of the past who said it was an authentic hadith. Likewise, is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, rated by Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam and Sayyidina Hawa alayhi salam in paradise, that when Satan deceived them both, Adam and Hawa, they repented and sought intercession to Allah with my name. So they used the name of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is reported by Imam Ibn al-Jawzi and graded authentic by Shaykh Abdullah al-Ghumari and others. So this recent scholar of Sunni Islam from Morocco, he looked at this hadith and he said it's authentic. So they sought intercession with the name of the Prophet ﷺ. So along the lines of they used the name of the Prophet ﷺ, asked to be forgiven by the Prophet ﷺ. Okay. Moving on, there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, the one who leaves his house for prayer and then says, oh Allah, I ask you by the right of those who ask you. So this is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he made dua, and he taught this dua that when you're leaving your house, you make this dua, I ask you by the right of those ask you. So this is not the prophets, just generally for the pious. I ask you by the right of those who ask you. So that includes, that's evidence that you can use that kind of phrasing for any pious person. I ask you by Imam al-Bukhari, I ask you by the rank of Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jailani, I ask you by the rank of the pious people of High Wycombe. There's nothing, that's, you can say that as well. There's pious people here in this town that are beloved to Allah. I'll ask you by them to forgive our sins and ease our difficulties. And the reason why is because this hadith was mentioned where it's permissible to ask generally by, I ask you by the right of those who ask you. It's general, it's not just the prophets. So this is mentioned as a hadith, and a Hasan hadith according to Shaykh Mamdu al-Iraqi al-Dimyati ibn Hajar. So scholars of the past, the first person here is a modern scholar alive now. He presented detailed research on this, and this is in the Ibn Khuzaymah hadith collection, if I recall correctly. That's also another hadith, and those are the scholars who said it's authentic with that wording. Okay, so that's the first point. That's the evidence for saying, oh, Allah ask you by the rank of the Prophet ﷺ, or Allah ask you by the rank of the pious people, and you can specify them if you want. So that's permitted. The Sunni scholar said it's permitted. You can say that.